Hello and welcome to this new episode of Upclose with Upword. Our guest today is a writer and professor of media studies at the University of San Francisco in California. I am talking about Professor Vamsee Juluri, who has featured on an Upword video before also, and he has collaborated with us as a contributor of the script for more than one video, and all those videos have been very special. It is after a long time that I have had the privilege of sitting next to him and speaking with him, and I hope that this episode, benefits our viewers as well. Welcome, sir. Welcome to Upward. It's been a long time.
Very happy.
And I must mention that, how I got introduced to you was after reading your book, Rearming Hinduism. And at that time, I think it was 2015.
Yes.
So 2015 is when I first heard of you. And I was so taken in by the book, so impressed with the writing that the day I met you, it was a fanboy moment for me.
Thank you.
So I always wanted to ask you this, and perhaps we can start with that. Why did you title it Rearming Hinduism?
The words, in a way, came from that particular image. I was familiar with the Hampi Narasimhaswamy, which I had seen way back, I think in 2005 or so, when I went there with my students. And then I obviously had a real Hampi, awakening, Naipaul, whatever kind of moment back then. But it took several years for, I think, that memory to manifest again in relation to what I was writing. And 2014-15, if you remember, there were a lot of controversies in the Western media and academia, particularly about the representation of Hinduism in religious studies, in children's school textbooks, and of course, in relation to Indian politics as well, because by then it was clear that Narendra Modi would win the election. There was also a big Hinduism pop culture thing going on with Amish's novel. So I felt there was something very interesting happening at that time. And as a media researcher, I was writing about it. But I also felt very pained by, the absolutely adamant refusal to engage in dialogue or debate in Western academia and also in Western media. You could see all the walls were closing, in the sense when I was writing about pop culture or some general topics, once in a while I would be published. But when it came to directly questioning some of these absurd claims that academics were making, or the absurd lies that were in the California and American history textbooks, people weren't budging even to listen to us. So then I saw this image of Narasimhaswamy and I noticed that his right hand is missing. So somehow, and by then I'd written the first draft of the book. I wrote it very fast. It sort of came to me very, very quickly in around April 2014. And then I saw the picture of Narasimhaswamy and I said, my God, this is like our situation. It's like we want to just sit down and write our story. Maybe as a writer, writing is how I think about it. And our writing arm is missing. So quite literally, I wanted to call it, rearming, in the sense, hey, just we need to get our hand back so we can tell our story. And then, of course, there was obviously, this kind of implication that rearming also means militarizing and weaponizing and so on. And at that time, I had a genuinely liberal and somewhat pacifist conviction that my rearming meant entirely rearming with intelligence and kindness and ahimsa and all that. But now I recognize why books like, Kshatra are doing so well, by Satabdhani Ganeshji, or Sandeep's books on, or the great Sitaram Goel's, heroic resistance, which I finally read in these last few years. So I think, maybe Narasimhaswamy put that word in my mind that, okay, you can still be a Gandhian when you start writing this book and say rearming in the sense of kindness and stuff. But in the real world, people better wake up. that it's going to get nastier than that. Be prepared.
You mentioned California textbook, the whole controversy. What, if I may ask, is the status of the books now?
So I believe there will be another round coming up in a year or two. I mean, I hear people talking about it on and off. So 2016, 17 was when the last sort of very intense and controversial drama took place, which I described, I think, in the conclusion of the new edition as something like, we won the battle then, but we very nearly have lost the war. And what I mean by that is the simple fact that in 2016, when all the inputs were being considered by the Department of Education.
Just for the viewers, I think it's important to mention, for those who don't know, that the California textbooks had a lot of content which was blatantly anti-Hindu or Hinduphobic. And there was a long battle, including a legal battle, and of course, battle of perceptions, that, about changing some of the stuff of how Hinduism was being represented. And I think the battle went back a decade before 2016.
Yes.
So from 2005 or 6 is when the thing started.
Absolutely. Yeah. So 2006 was when I think the first time that the Hindu community in California took notice of this. I mean, informally, people would always say, hey, our kids are, finding outrageous stuff in the textbook or in the classroom. But then the usual model minority, let's not rock the boat fit in. Nobody complained. 2005, 6, yes, people went. And I believe what happened, I wasn't that involved at that time, but Professor Shiva Bajpai, who was a historian, was asked to suggest, improvements, which he did, which the board, I think, accepted. But then at the last minute, the entire American Indology, Hinduism studies establishment came down and said, oh, these Hindu nationalists are rewriting history in California and all that. So that was the first time I heard of it. And I wrote one op-ed, which was published in opposition to Romila Thapar and Michael Witzel in the San Francisco Chronicle. Those were the days when there was still a token debate permitted in America. But 2016 was a dramatic one, and I'll explain a little more what happened then for people who are new to it. Because what was set in place at that time wasn't just about the textbooks. It is about everything that's happening in America and perhaps the world in terms of who we are supposed to be, our identity. So in 2016...
sorry for the intervention. Yeah. One of the points of contention was the use of the phrase South
Asia. Yeah, right. That's it. That is the buzzword you should remember. So every time you hear this phrase South Asia, remember in 2016, it all started with South Asia studies professors hammering in a whole paradigm, a whole plethora, a whole system of points about who we are, what happened in our past, and implicitly whether we are good guys or bad guys.
So basically anything positive, you are denied your identity as an Indian. Mm-hmm. Hindu comes later.
Right.
But you're not even supposed to be called Indian if there's anything positive associated with
South
the region.
Asian, right.
And if there's negative, then you become Indian or Hindu. Absolutely. Then you become Hindu immediately.
Yeah. So it's very, very Orwellian. And of course, I will talk more about Orwell, I think, today because of my class and everything. But so very, very briefly, some of the things that they asked for in 2016 were, the overarching, claim they had in their letter, which was signed by all the top professors from many prestigious schools, was there was no India before 1947. So all references to India before 1957 must be erased, and in the syllabus and in the textbooks eventually, millions of children should be taught that it is improper to say India before 1947, say South Asia. Okay. Similarly, they said the word Hinduism also should be removed. And in the past, when they talk about a few things like, say, yoga or Vedas or whatever, because some of the Hindu groups, community organizations had managed to get a few positive changes in. They said you shouldn't say Hinduism, you should say, quote, religion of ancient India. So this is what actually Orwell calls doublethink. So anyway, we'll come back to that later. But so that was a broad thing. And what it meant in reality, to give you some examples, in the whole timeline of Indian history they wanted taught, wherever the word India came, like there was a line which said, China, India, and the Islamic world were not easy for Europeans to colonize at first, or something. Just remove India, and what the line became China and the Islamic civilization stretching from Africa to Asia.
Wow.
So it's literally like they disappeared a country with 1 billion people. Now one might say, hey, these are just words on a page, or at most these are words in a history syllabus, or so you can say that. But if you look at it logically, see where those words are going, those lying words from a letter by professors, which got accepted at first by the education department. Then it became words in a syllabus. Then it became words in $1 billion industry, which is textbooks and lesson plans, which then become the content of forceful indoctrinating pedagogy. Recently I listened to an actual history, world history, AP world history class taking place when they came to ancient India. It's exactly what the propaganda document of 2016 said, the South Asia school, still going on. So, and then you see from textbooks, it not only goes into the minds of people, a lot of Hindu kids, maybe they pretend to believe in class, but back home they know it's not true. Eventually it gets reinforced, and that's what happened in the last 10 years. That's why I say we won the battle a little bit. We kept, in the syllabus, they agreed to keep the name India in several places, and they rejected the more absurd of the South Asia claims. Actually, one thing I don't remember whether they accepted or took out, modern history. There was a reference to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, I think in 11th or 12th grade history. The original line, the proposed line in the syllabus was students should be made aware of Wahhabism and, Islamic fundamentalism in relation to the attacks. Our friends, the South Asia studies professors, had that changed to students should be, in relation to 9/11, students should be taught that Islamic extremism is often a reaction to Hindu nationalism, Christian nationalism, Buddhist nationalism. So, that's the level at which is going on. And now, anyway, now you see the tragedy when you see the images, particularly the last few months of American campuses on fire, literally, and students attacking each other and faculty. And it's crazy. I think it's like the lies that so many academics forced, wishing this could be true,
right,
is now exploded, because the mind melting, the mind adharma happened around 10 years ago. Now the bodily adharma is exploding,
Right.
It exploded in Israel, and it's exploding on campuses. And, so it's a tragic situation where propaganda is exploding, and Hindus in America were caught in the middle of it. And here we are with my book, which I hope will help in some way,
No, the funny part about speaking with you is that there are so many threads that keep getting opened up, and you wonder which line of questioning you should pursue. But I will stick to a structure more or less, because otherwise it may go all abstract.
Yes.
So I'll come back to your book, and you mentioned that you've added a few chapters in the new edition of Rearming Hinduism. So tell us briefly about the new themes and why you felt the need to add them to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we let the book center us, because there is indeed so much to speak of. So yeah, it's almost 10 years, I guess, since I wrote the book. And there were a couple of reasons why I ended up revisiting it. The first one is a sort of a logistical supply chain issue, which is that my old publisher sort of folded shop a couple of years ago.
Oh, Westland?
Westland, yeah.
Oh, Westland is not functional in India?
I think they started it up again and all that, but
achha.
yeah, on a lower, smaller scale. And maybe they weren't that committed to liberal discourse anymore, because I didn't hear back from them when I. So, I mean, at that time, it was an admirable thing they did, in the sense that even though they were somewhat leaning towards the more, questioning Hindutva side, as many big corporate publishers are, they believed in this idea that a publisher should be liberal, and so they published, Rearming Hinduism. Yeah. So, but now that when they closed shop, they somehow, when they reopened it, I don't think it was high on their priority, and a lot of people were asking me, for copies of the book, and at that time, I discovered the wonderful work that the new publishing house Blue One Inc. is doing. Praveen Tiwari ji is doing, and I think many of our common friends are publishing with him. And I read Hindus in Hindu Rashtra, and I thought it was a really, important and succinct book. So then I spoke to Praveen ji, and we thought this would be a very good time to republish Rearming Hinduism, and I will credit him for being a good editor and telling me this has to be more than just a reprint. You should write something.
Right.
So there are two, new chapters, in a sense, a new introduction and a new conclusion or afterword, both of which I think, or I hope, will be useful to readers in summarizing both the optimistic and the not so optimistic trends of the last 10 years. So my my new introduction is titled From Mamadehi Karavalambam to Jai Shri Ram. And it sort of traces the, not so much traces a journey, but in the sense that, so Mamadehi Karavalambam was from Lakshmi, Adi Shankaracharya's famous poem to Narasimha Swami, give us the shelter of your hands. So when Rearming Hinduism came out, and we had this whole missing hand funda, I used to sign the books with that line, Mamadehi Karavalambam. But now this year, obviously, I think this is the year of Jai Shri Ram, and as it happened in January, I was on a tour of temples in Andhra Pradesh, went to some amazing temples, and I was also doing this in the shadow of losing my second parent, which is my mom, which is Amma, last year. So I went to her childhood village, and she was born in Hampi, so I also went to Hampi. So in the new introduction, I talk about the energy that I witnessed in India now, today, especially in January 2024, which was a historic occasion, and what it was like being in tiny villages in ancient punyakshetras, and what the energy and aspiration and hopes that Jai Shri Ram, every voice saying Jai Shri Ram today, is embodying. So that is one new section, and I hope people will read it, because I think it also resonates with the mood of Rearming Hinduism in 2014, which was very optimistic. But when I read it, the whole book, especially the previous conclusion, I started to think with a somewhat clinical academic mind, maybe my ending was too optimistic in 2014. So the new afterword, I wrote very much for the purpose of documenting history, documenting for history Hinduphobia in the last 10 years, or as they say in social media lingo, taking receipts. So the new afterword is a summary of essentially media propaganda and Hinduphobia from 2014 to 2024. And it's interesting that I started with the premise that I don't know, I'm not sure after 10 years if we could say we rearmed Hinduism. I mean, in some ways, well, yeah, there was Jai Shri Ram, there are some optimistic moments. In some ways, the Renaissance I had predicted or I had celebrated back 10 years ago is happening, in the sense that we have wonderful journals like, Pragyata and Upword, And the last time I was here, we didn't have these beautiful lamps, and so it's and so I mean things are slowly. The Renaissance part of it is happening. There's a lot of talk about Indic knowledge. So all that part is there, giving credit to all of that. But the sad part is Hinduphobia got rearmed, renewed, and re-unleashed on us in a very, very vicious way in the last 10 years. And I wrote this summary. I think it almost came out like stream of consciousness. Maybe it's just the pain accumulating, day after day, lie after lie, year after year, tweet after tweet, professor after professor, So that new afterword, I think, will serve as a record. Because there's so many things people have forgotten already, because in the internet age, it's easy to forget. So starting in 2014 to 15, the whole Go Rakshak scare, then 2016, the California, South Asia, campaign, 2018, the bizarre escalation that took place when the tragedy took place in Kathua. And, suddenly you had people sharing obscene cartoons about Shiva and Vishnu and Krishna and getting away with it as of, So it is like, we are living through a war, a psychological war, which really should not be allowed to even exist. But then this technology has become like that. We were talking earlier about AI and all these things. So people have unleashed these weapons. They've divided us. 2019, I think the CAA protests were another breaking point in terms of reality for Indians. So in a sense, I think what I've done here is not just a documentation of Hinduphobic incidents in the media, but also a kind of a theory about how much more pernicious and complex propaganda has become in the last 10 years, which I think a lot of Hindus don't realize. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, you could counter with befitting replies. You could respond with facts and debates or whatever. Now people's minds are so colonized. It is very, very hard. We don't have easy answers on what to do because we've been taking injuries from a psychological napalm bombing attack for 10 years. So that's what I wrote in that book. And of course, it's not just media and culture, the real world stuff.
Right.
I mean, the Pulwama attacks, the guy calling Hindus, Kavpis, whatever, the normalization of Kavpis in America, the attacks on Tulsi Gabbard and many Hindu politicians there, the attacks during the Kashi Vishwanath controversy, the Jaipur Tailor. So many acts of real life violence have taken place. So many media things have taken place. So I've documented as best as I can in the conclusion. So I hope people who have the book will buy it again so that you have this.
I certainly will.
Thank you. Thank you.
When is it coming out?
June, hopefully.
Okay. So thanks for that summary. And, while that chapter and what you've just spoken about talks about how things have occurred in the last 5, 6, 7 years, and that's perhaps a documentation of all that. But I'm also interested in your own journey as a writer, as an academic, even as a Hindu, from the time that you first wrote Rearming Hinduism, how you saw things and how you saw the world. You mentioned that you were more optimistic. And now that you've written the new edition with these new chapters, how have you changed? How has your perspective changed?
Well, the first thing is I had the privilege and blessing of making new friends since the time the book came out, and having my own fanboy moments several times along the way. So to put it simply, I think I learned that there is a lot of things I still needed to learn. And it took me 2-3 years, I think, to reach that point. Because see, almost everything I'd written in that book came out of two learning streams in my life. The first half was sort of a very nascent critique of Hinduphobia in academia and media. And it was rooted very much in what I was trained in as a media studies professor or a media studies scholar. So I was trying to apply Edward Said's concept of Orientalism and post-colonial studies and those kind of things. And so the first thing I have realized is it's a starting point, yes. If you are in the humanities or social sciences, or you want to talk about colonialism and where these stereotypes or misrepresentations come home, it's useful. But that's not our story. So what is our story? Is the Hindu experience in response to colonialism the same as Edward Said's Arab or Middle Eastern response to colonialism? It's not. So I think the greatest awakening I had was realizing how little I knew, in a sense, and discovering, first of all, most importantly, the works of Sitaram Goel and Ram Swarup and the Voice of India School, for which I'm very grateful to our mutual friend Pankaj. And I still remember Sandeep, Pankaj and I went to Omkareshwar. And that night, we went to his home and his parents made wonderful food. And he showed me this treasure of Voice of India books. So that was a very beautiful moment. And reading Sandeep's work and the Voice of India School, Conrad, of course, has been a wonderful intellectual interlocutor and friend. He wrote one of the first reviews of Rearming Hinduism. The other very interesting intellectual, I guess, stimulation for me came to me from the Ghent School of, from Prakasha and, Jacob D. Ruwer wrote a very interesting critical review of my book. And it took me a long time to understand why I didn't have the answers to the questions he had. And in a way, I realized that's because the paradigm I was in was the post-colonial studies paradigm, which was the Arab, Middle Eastern, Islamic dialogue with the West or the Christian West. And we had just sort of been tolerated on its coattails in academia, And now it suddenly became clear to me why my good liberal friends in academia, fellow post-colonialists, weren't seeing the very simple reasonableness of what we Hindus were saying. And then I realized that, we had a deeper foundation to draw on. So the Voice of India literature, and then I think Bal Gangadhar's critique of, essentially the Christian foundations of the so-called secular social science worldview, and his great talk, what do Indians need, history of the past. So, yeah, I think, S.N. Bal Gangadhar's work and that of his students, made me see the Western academic tradition in which I was trained and I was working in a much deeper and broader light. And then, of course, the other even more exciting and perhaps humbling thing that I learned was pertain to the second half of the book. So the second half of the book is really kind of a very personal, bhakti, my experience of Sanatana Dharma from, my parents and from my guru and a little bit of Gandhian Hinduism. That's kind of how it was. It was kind of a bhakti Hinduism. But what I did not know, frankly, I think when I was writing that book, is that, what today people are calling the knowledge systems. That Madhvacharya wasn't just, for example, wasn't just, like a spiritual teacher who was saying love God and, be good and all that. Or what the young scholar Hali Kalyan, of whom I'm a big fan, says, Vedas.pdf, right? So I think that that system, that coding just got shattered when I suddenly learned. And again, for this, I thank many, many of my friends, and particularly Raghottama Rao Garu in Tirupati, who tweets as Madhva History, and he makes wonderful documentaries on Anveshi, that there is a living, continuing body of knowledge and scholarship, paramparas, and these are just ongoing. And why in the world do we need to read, or why in the world does the American Academy confine itself to this, ugly fantasy of, can I use a stronger word?
Yes.
An ugly, incestuous fantasy of, Wendy quoting Sheldon, Sheldon quoting whatever that saying is, Max, Max quoting I don't know who else, But so that is the crazy world out there. Whereas here, you go to Udupi, you go to Mantralayam, Kashi, or so many places, you will find Sanskrit scholars, Pandits, who are very much growing up in that lineage. You'll see children there learning Sanskrit from a small age, and they're doing everything, the pujas as well as the scholarship. The other important tribute I must pay, because he passed away in 2018, I think, or 19, is Pejavar Swami.
Right.
So I actually managed to present my book to him, and about a year before he left us in this form. So I think I started seeing Pejavar Swami and everybody with new eyes, because I think when I was younger, they were like just respected spiritual figures or religious figures who did pujas, and it was all nice. And now I said, my God, these guys are professors.
Right.
And when we went to Navabrindavana in Hampi, and I just looked at it and I said, my God, this is the 9 professors, university. So in a sense, maybe I got really excited to realize this is an ocean of knowledge coming down generation to generation. And for lack of a better word, I called it Hinduism. And I confined myself to a little bit of a bhakti analysis of what it all means as best as I knew. So I think that is the other part where, I'm starting to see that there is a lot more. So both in terms of Hinduism, philosophy, Indian knowledge systems, and in terms of an Indian social science, which I think is more nascent, and which I think is where probably I'm more professionally, meant to engage with, with the work of Voice of India and the Kent School. I think those are the 2 streams where I realized a lot was already there, a lot more is happening, and a lot more will happen.
Right. Now, coming to your straddling 2 worlds, right? You divide your time and, more importantly, your attention between India and the US, 2 continents, 2 cultures, 2 civilizations. Now, the world has changed a lot in the last 2 or 3 decades. In the 90s, any good student, it was almost inevitable for him or her to dream of emigrating to the US, and it was the land of opportunities. Perhaps it still is, but things are not as rosy as they once were, and it's not an automatic choice anymore. At least that's what I understand. Now, as someone who's been through that, right, personally, and as a media studies professor, I think you happen to be at a vantage point when it comes to understanding trends and trajectories, right? So what would you tell a student who's looking or who's exploring the opportunity or the possibility of higher studies in the US? What are the pros and cons today? And what precautions should they take, and how should they really think about it? A lot of people, because they get advice from so many different sources, that a lot of people end up being confused. What would your advice to them be?
Listen to your parents or grandparents and traditional gurus, whoever is a kind, wise figure for practical knowledge. Second, what you said is absolutely true. There's a lot of people saying a lot of things, and I'll be shameless and unhumble and just say, listen to a professor, please. Because there is so much competition for attention now, particularly in this online Hindu community space. I have been trying to reach out and communicate, because as far as I know there are some amazing scholars doing amazing work on Hindu revival and fighting Hinduphobia and all these things. But I just happen to be one of a very small handful of people who happen to be professors in America, teaching 18 to 22-year-olds year after year for the last 20, 25 years. Okay. And on top of it, I'm not even in engineering, where the content doesn't affect you that much. I'm in the liberal arts. So I have seen what were once quote unquote fringe ideas, even in liberal American campuses, now becoming the mainstream dominant ideas all across America. So understand, the first point I will say is, be careful in terms of what you believe, who you believe if you're going abroad, and be careful also in terms of your own wishful thinking. And because I had it too, in the early 90s when I went, I had a fantasy about what America was, because Oliver Stone's movie, The Doors, had just come out. And so I thought America was where you go and write poetry and become rich and famous. So, and I had a guitar like yours, Ashish, and I used to play the Doors songs very badly. But anyway, so what I'm saying is, if you're in your 20s and you're about to go to America, have your dreams. You should have your dreams of whatever it is you're seeking there. Like a sense of purpose, or a better life, or a meaning of life, or fun. By all means, be positive and be energetic and all that, but also keep a reality check. And I think every generation that's going to America, more and more in the last 20, 30 years, I've seen it, we are fooled by the assumption or the appearance of familiarity. Okay. When my generation went to America, 80s, 90s, that time, we had a little bit of that because, see, we are familiar. They have the same language we do. Some friends, cousins, etc. have gone, and seniors from school have gone to America. But things are more complicated now. Okay. So, and the problem is, I think now, because there's more information available, thanks to the internet and global TV and everything, I think it is very easy for youngsters in India today to assume they know America and they understand America. Because you probably know the memes, you probably have internet friends in America, Instagram, whatever. So it's very easy to just assume that you understand that society and culture. And, and naturally, when you get accepted, or if you get a scholarship, you're going to feel like, hey, I've cracked the system, I'm going. But there are a lot of things we Indians don't know. And I don't mean just the youngsters who are about to go. Even the Indians who've been settled for 40, 50 years and have become CEOs and big, millionaires, there are things they don't understand about that society. So I think it has something to do with what S.N. Balagangadhara has called the Indian and Western modes of learning. The Western mode of learning is more abstract, theoretical. So they're able to extract a theory about behavior or about a society and share it. We don't do that. For us, everything's imitative. So we imitate elders, our friends, etc. And we're a practical community. So when we go to America, we do well economically. So year after year, we have Indians going there and we imitate people who are there, and we manage to get degrees and jobs and do well economically, all that. But we are in a crisis situation because we have zero power in America. Imagine the Jewish community, which did have power. They had a lot more wealth than us, a lot more political influence than us. Look at the way they're scrambling, they're hiding because they're being beaten up everywhere. You know why? Because they lost the perception battle. It is their society. Western society, they call Judeo-Western society. And yet, because for 40, 50 years, I think they were so secure in their own internal worldview, they didn't realize that in 2-3 generations, their own children have turned against them. Because their own children think that their parents are oppressors and Zionists and colonizers. So that is happening to some extent in the Indian community also. So if you are a student in America today in an American college, it is extremely difficult to deal with the kind of propaganda that is being thrown at you. That if you put Vibhuti, this is a caste mark, somebody will say it's a caste mark. Do you know it's offensive? The most funny example I'll tell you, so if you're a student going abroad, this is what one of my students long back told me. At the same time, the India-South Asia dispute was going on. One of my students comes to me and says, Professor, is it offensive for us to call ourselves Indian? I said, no, why? I think it's only the professors who would say such funny things. So I said, no, but why? Why are you asking me? So she says her roommates told her that if we call ourselves Indian, Native Americans will get offended because only they can call themselves Indian. I said, okay, so who told you this? My roommate. Okay, who's your roommate, if I may ask? She's white. So, sociology lesson done. So what has happened, I think, with a lot of Indians is, again, we imitate. So, and Indians being, I think, a lot of Indian immigrants being successful there, their kids go to Ivy League schools. They're growing up essentially in the rich, liberal, white bubble. So they have assumed a kind of, the rich, liberal, white guilt or whatever strange, Christian, post-Christian, cultural, psychological behavior pattern they have. These kids have picked it up. So they will show up at these caste bill hearings and, whatever is happening, they'll show up and say, Modi is the fascist, Hindutva is upper caste hegemony. I've had students, just in class discussions, assume that Narendra Modi is a Brahmin because they just, in their minds, Hindutva, upper caste, Savarna, Modi, bad guy, Brahmin. So this is, so I know, usually if you're a student about to go abroad, people will give you practical advice, like how to get a job and visa. All of these are becoming very difficult. That is a fact. I can give advice on the subtle cultural, psychological, narrative battles that are going on. And these are important because ultimately, collectively, we don't have political power in India. So if you're an Indian student who goes abroad, you're going to be going abroad at a time when, excuse me, on the one hand, India as a country is seen perhaps in government circles, etc., business circles as rising, right? And the foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has written two, very persuasive books on that topic. So in that sense, if you're in a crisis and you're in trouble, the Indian consulate probably will come and help you out. But then I think the Indian Ayurveda approach is prevention is better than cure. So why do you want to be in a crisis? And that's where I think we should mention what we were talking about earlier, and that is very, very saddening. In just the last 6 to 8 months, I think over 12 students of Indian origin have died in mysterious circumstances in America. At least a few people were actually shot and murdered. So we don't know, is this systematic or is it all crime? Now, again, the Indian community will say, oh, it's all economic envy. But since I mentioned the last chapter of Rearming Hinduism, where I've documented 10 years of Hinduphobia, most of it in America, maybe there is a hate campaign, right? The hate campaign that's gone on for 10 years, where the same way Jews were called rats or Japanese were called roaches, by the racist propaganda during war, Hindus are now called cow piss drinkers. Or, there's a lot of excreta related, highly toxic, dehumanizing things done to us. So if you're a student going abroad, remember, your professor, the person next to you, they may be nice people and they may be professional, they may value your work, but this mess which has been designed, it's like a poison gas that has been genetically modified maybe to affect only the Indians there or the Indian image there. So you're going at a time when in the Indian image, the Hindu image is very, very compromised. So equip yourself for that, know the arguments, pay attention. Don't assume, that because Western, pop culture or you're good at engineering, everything will be great. The stereotypes will affect your career also. Okay, so I don't know if you remember a few years ago when all the BBC and all were making documentaries saying India is the rape capital of the world. Do you remember what happened to one student who was going to Germany? I think there was an article at that time, 4 or 5 years ago. So there was an Indian student who was offered a scholarship or a postdoc as a scientist in Germany. And that professor actually withdrew it and apparently said, I just saw this documentary and look, there's a lot of women in my lab, and in your culture, you are unsafe to women. So your culture makes you unsafe to the women in my lab.
Wow.
So, that's the kind of insanity that is going on. So whatever your seniors who went to America 10, 15 years ago tell you about, oh yeah, we are respected for our brains and our hard work and, our non-criminal record and all that, that's not the only game in town. The South Asia game has done untold damage. And the Indian government too, they talk about befitting replies these days. Okay, at the government to government level, somebody, a diplomat will go to the UN and say, oh yeah, Hinduphobia, religiophobia and all that. But there's nothing happening on the ground in America, trust me. I'll give you a comparative example. So if you're a student from China going to America in the last 10, 15 years, you will find newspapers designed and published by the Chinese government to tell you what's happening in China in every campus. No university will remove it or dare to touch it. And now you could say, oh, that's propaganda, but we are a democracy, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, every Chinese student knows what to say. Now, in the 1990s, every campus would have a lot of liberal whites and people from here and there marching saying Free Tibet. In the last 20 years, I have not seen a single Free Tibet poster in an American university. Okay, that is real power. That is real power. Now, Indian students also bring the same amount of money, I assume, as Chinese students to America. And we have a government which now, is at least speaking up. Okay, fine. But how come we don't have the clout where American university professors can, say whatever they want about Hindus, about students, and there's a website called Hindu on Campus, which is documenting all these things in America. So if you're an Indian student going abroad, do look at Hindu on Campus and be aware of everything that is going on. The way the universities have become a hotbed for foreign powers there to at least intimidate foreign populations like yours. So you'll be psychologically intimidated. You will be professionally already crippled as an Indian or as a Hindu. So these are all the things that are happening, and the government could be doing a lot more, particularly the MEA. Recently, there was one video that came out. I'll mention it because if any students are watching. The CEO of Pepsi, former CEO Indira Nooyi, I think issued a video, a message for students going abroad, saying, just be careful, don't do drugs and illegal things. That's how you could come into contact with criminals. All that is good advice. But then, that is not the only problem today. It's not just crime that is a problem. Hinduphobia, which has been stoked the last 10 years, is a problem. And I think the MEA needs to step up. Every Hindu parent also needs to step up. It's not just about getting an I-20. You need a intellectual I-20 in a sense to say, I'm getting admitted into a battlefield. So having said all this, I'm not discouraging you from going. Just know what you're going into, take it up as a challenge, not only professionally, but also for your ancestors, for your gods. Because if you go to America today and you are equipped to speak the truth about Hinduism, your ancestors will bless you, and your children and descendants who are likely to stay Hindu if you go there and fight, they will be grateful to you.
Right. So I think a lot of it finally comes down to what our friend Pankaj calls Swayambodha.
Yes.
You need to be aware of who you are, and especially when you're going into a foreign culture, which is, you could argue that today at the superficial level all cultures are the same.
Right.
but then reality is different, and what you see on TV or in movies and pop culture. You also did a video on that, Hinduphobia and pop culture with Upword. Now, the influence that mass media has on our lives. And TV still is one of the major channels of what you would call propaganda. And in TV specifically, the news, which is designed more for entertainment than for informing the audience. I am curious as to, your views as an academic on the difference in how news channels operate or how news is broadcast in India versus the West.
There's a famous book, Sachiritra, Our Cinema, Their Cinema. So it's like our insanity, their insanity. That sums up, I think, the news culture. So it's interesting you should ask me about the news, and I'm glad you are, because 2 days ago I recorded a podcast with some Indian journalists and a journalism professor in the UK, where they were kind of surprised, or rather reluctant at first, to respond to my questions about what news means historically, and why does it even exist? Because I think for them, they were operating on this assumption that in India the news is very pro Modi, and there is censorship going on. So that's why democracy is
under threat
and backsliding. So it's part of the democratic backsliding that is happening in India. They say is because of the media not giving equal time to Rahul Gandhi. And if I open any newspaper, I do see a headline about Rahul Gandhi next to a headline about Modi. Certainly, I don't see strident criticism of Modi ji in the English papers the way it was 10, 15 years ago. And I think even in television news, there was a very oppositional channel at the national level, NDTV, which I think has become much more less oppositional. So to that extent, you could say the Indian news is less critical of the ruling party. Yeah, and one could say that. But this is the point I was trying to convey to them, and they kind of said, no, that's not in the syllabus. We are only talking about Indian news. So this is what happens to.
But this is about Indian news only.
Oh, sorry, no, the next thing I've mentioned, which was about Western news.
Okay.
So the point I was trying to tell them is, there is much one can criticize about Indian news, but I have to tell you about the tragedy of the Western news, where a former president had his press conference cut off mid-sentence in January 2021 on the rather exaggerated claim that he had led an armed insurrection against democracy or whatever. And now, a little back context to that, I've seen about 6 elections at least in America. The first time there were protests because people were upset that they lost, was not the MAGA people in 2021 January. It was the Berkeley High School kids in 2016. So 2016 election itself, because everybody in California, especially, the students and all, were convinced that Donald Trump was such a fringe candidate, and we are on this great global universal march to progress and equality. Hillary G will become president. And when she lost, these guys were furious. So the schools led everybody out to protest on the streets. And then, of course, 4 years later, when pro-Trump people did the same thing, I don't know what exactly happened there, but anyway, it was not worse than 9/11. That is the claim Democrats were making. So anyway, so in this interview about the news, I actually started with the American news. And I said, look, in America, a presidential candidate was made an unperson, as Orwell says. He was taken away. Oh, forget Trump. Okay, Trump is controversial. How about Tulsi? Tulsi Gabbard, a veteran, a soldier, a good liberal candidate, a rising star in the Democratic Party, person of color, woman, Hindu, all the things were going for her. And they disappeared her because she was challenging Kamala Harris and Hillary and that establishment. So all the news media silenced her eventually. They silenced Donald Trump. They took away his Twitter account. So I was trying to make the point that the degree of censorship and silencing in Western news is far more than here. I mean, you see in Rahul Gandhi on the news regularly. Even the other day, I was watching, I think, India Today T. Like 30-second clip of what Modi ji says, then what this guy says. So they're covering everybody. They may lean towards whoever is in power. At the national level, naturally, they'll lean towards BJP, or at least they won't harm, hit them beyond a point. But that goes in every state in India. When TRS was ruling in Hyderabad, the other channels were all, scared. And so, I mean, that is the diversity of news in India. So in that sense, democracy is not in danger, I think, because of censorship of news in India. So I'm sorry.
But someone should also tell them, these critics, that if Rahul Gandhi is given more airtime, it will only benefit.
I did mention that. I actually did mention that. That is, that is a popular opinion, and I share it too. But having said that, yes, democracy is vibrant in terms of the news. But I will offer a criticism of the news. We don't have a serious news culture in India. It is ratings driven. It is noisy. It is, physiologically disturbing. One channel, at least. At least one, maybe more. It is, physiologically disturbing to see the shrillness, the noise, the screaming. So I think news could be a lot better in India. So in terms of, again, the general advice to everybody, because in a way now with social media, everybody is a newscaster, everybody is a broadcaster. I would say we need to think in a longer historical perspective about why news exists. And I asked these professors the other day, what do you think existed instead of news in India before the Europeans came? Was there anything like that? And they said, no, it was like the Dark Ages. There was no democracy. It was authoritarianism. We didn't have a concept of citizenry and all this stuff. And then I said, well, if we have lived for thousands of years without something called the news, maybe it's not an essential commodity. So now you say, yes, okay, you need it for democracy and all that, well and good. But then let's get serious and professional and about it. One last point I want to say. Let's think of news which follows a rasa, an elevated rasa system, and not the lower chakra kind of news that we have.
So that was about TV news. Let's shift focus to social media. And, I remember when social media platforms, the popular ones, when they started gaining traction, it came in as a new hope for democratizing information flow and, giving voice to the voiceless, etc. And to some extent it was true, especially in the civilizational movement that we are part of. The internet really came in as a blessing. But my personal view is that, that honeymoon period is over. And I'm curious to know your views on how social media has evolved in the last 10 years, let's say, and where do you see it headed?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the broader pros and cons of the social media revolution, and then come back more specifically to Hindu civilizational concerns. A very important book just got published, and we might, I think, talk some more about it in one of the videos we'll do. It's called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And he builds on the work of Jean Twenge, whose work I found very useful on generational change, and particularly the impact of technology on people's perceptions and behavior and so on. So Haidt's book has become very controversial because he's made a very bold claim. Not the usual, vague, correlation claim, but he actually says this is a causal thing. I'm saying this is a cause. Social media and the smartphones are a cause of a vast outbreak of mental health problems among teens in America. So specifically, he says, from about 2012 to 15, all the indicators, anxiety, depression, etc., show a huge spike. So his critics have said maybe people are just reporting it more. But he says it's not just reporting, because there is also a spike in hospital visits for suicide attempts, self-harm, etc. Both boys and girls, but for girls, it's a lot more. And he's pinpoint precise. He says the internet started in the 90s, or it got popular. Social media also got popular by the early 2000s. They had, I think, MySpace and things like that. Phones were also around by the 90s. But he says there was no such mental disaster happening in 90s and early 2000s for teens for two reasons. The phones were basic, you were only texting them. Okay, that's one. Second, your social media life was confined usually to a family computer. So you were not isolated that much. And something similar also happened with television in America in the 80s. Till the 80s, most Americans had only one TV set. So always the broadcasting had to, balance for everyone. In the 90s in India, when Star TV and MTV Channel V came, they had the same thing. Most houses had only one TV. That's why Channel V had this formula called Young and Young at Heart, where they said in demographics, we are going to be dealing with the whole family, but in terms of attitude or mood, we'll make it youth. So again, I think in a way I'm saying, looking at how generations is a very important factor in media, both theory and practice. So what happened 2012, the new iPhone came out, I think it was 6 or 7. And he says that was the first one where there was an app store and it was visually very intense. And he says starting at that time, the Gen Z, as they're called, kids born 95 to 2010, the first of the Gen Z were entering their teens, they got iPhone, and their engagement with social media became very different from before. First of all, they were isolated because everybody's looking into the phone. And then it is addictive. The scrolling, it is weaponized. The design is weaponized to draw children's attention or anybody's attention. So you keep going and going and going. And then he says, what has happened is this whole generation has missed out on real life, essentially. They don't play out that much. They don't interact with people that much. So as a result, as Jean Twenge says, there's a generation which is good at reading emojis, but not good at reading people's faces or voices. So I think worldwide, they say definitely in Europe, there is a mental health crisis, possibly elsewhere too. In India, from what I've seen, anybody I talk to about phones, they'll say, yeah, bacche log hamesha phone pe rehte hain, everybody. So that is there. The phone is part of people's lives. But I think the compensation in India, antidote for good or for bad, is you can't escape real life in India. You're always going to have people around you. And in the colonies, I see children playing in the evening. So that way, maybe physiologically, neurologically, behaviorally, for now, Indian children are not facing that much harm as in the West. But all the same, I'll also mention, the other day in this online class I'm teaching for children and parents on 1984 and media and all that, a lot of children, school kids are saying that in Indian schools, there is a crisis of depression and mental health, self-harm and bullying, reputation harm, slander. These are all concerns. So I think that is the dangerous edge of social media, where every parent, even if you are, even if you believe that, we are all Hindutva ideologues here who want to take India to 10,000 BC and all that. Trust me, we are also living in the modern world like you. So we wish well for your children because, that's a Hindu thing to do. I won't say much about religions which devour their children and chop off the heads of their old every generation and have revolutions. But look, there is a broader crisis that is in the West because of social media. It is already happening in India too. So if you're a parent, whether you're a Hindu parent or a secular parent, I think everybody should be aware of the power of social media and read Twenge and Haidt and others. Now, more precisely about the issues that we care about, which is Hindu survival and revival. I know in the early 2000s there was a lot of optimism about the internet. I think Dr. Swami used that phrase, right? Internet Hindus. And
Right.
so, and there was optimism about it. And I think a lot of parallel scholarship criticizing academia came out on Rediff and all these blogs and all that. I think most famously in America, Rajiv Malhotra's work, and in India, Rajiv Srinivasan was writing in Rediff. So there were a lot of new voices. So that way, I think it was exciting for people to become more informed. Now, the second phase, 2010s onwards, obviously YouTube was the big thing, I think, in the last 10, 15 years. And there is amazing videography going on YouTube, long form lectures. Sangam Talks, for example, does very good, features good talks over there. Then the shorter videos, I think there's something called Chitti Media, and of course Upword. So video is definitely booming. So now there is a perception that so those are good things. There's more information, more online communities, interactions, all this stuff. But then, is it without problems? No. In fact, I think social media, in a sense, has become like quicksand for the Hindu revival, for the Hindu movement. Because, in fact, I haven't really thought it through, but if you look at it very carefully, like we talked about earlier with advice for Indian students who are going abroad and hearing 10 different things from people. Your Instagram influencer will tell you, wear blue jeans and, sandals in class at school. Somebody else will tell you, no, wear a suit and go to class. You never know. And by the way, I was actually misadvised on that in 19... when I was going, one of my father was sending me to talk to anybody with any connection to America for advice. And one auntie told me, who had visited the town where I was going to study. I said, auntie, like what do students wear? She said, they wear, clothes just like you. They'll wear some t-shirt with that long hair fellow, heavy metal fellow, and they'll wear jeans and sneakers. And so that's how I went. But what I did not realize, Ashish ji, is in a master's program in conservative Midwestern America, most of the students are working professionals, like the TV news readers, there are senior journalists. So they're all coming to class wearing suits. And,
Wow.
And we are a bunch of, 5-6 foreigners, mostly from India, who think we know everything because we know English. And here I am dressed wearing, basically American undergraduate clothes. So what did it do to my image, my, ability to be taken seriously? Sorry. So what I'm saying is, cut to the present. That is the problem we are all facing today on the internet. There is no quality, right? Popularity tends to rule. These algorithms also, I think, favor what's already popular. So, and then the discourse itself changes. I think that's happened to Hindus a lot. A lot of people, I think, who could be doing very good educational work online end up chasing popularity.
Numbers. Yeah.
Numbers. So it becomes more confrontational, more negative, and news becomes what Matt Taibbi called a rhetorical addiction. So social media is also like that. So the same things, like for example, left liberals, right wingers, the same phrases being said again and again. I wrote a ebook a few years ago called Writing Across a Cracked World, Hindu Representation and the Logic of Narrative. It's just a little guide to explain to people what words sound like to others, So, and that is important because I think the Hindu movement is siloized. Everybody is siloized on social media. But the difference is, see, there may be left or, Hinduphobic silos in social media, okay? But those guys are not only in a silo. Every textbook in India is carrying their point of view. I mean, recently I analyzed a current Indian NCERT civics textbook, which was republished last year, so it's currently in use, but it was written in 2005. So it's a UPA textbook in use for 20 years. And it is so different from the civics textbook of our time where it was all about how government works. every page is about how to do protests.
Wow.
Yeah, it's on my Twitter. So and maybe we can make a video of that also.
Right.
Every page is about how to take action, how to protest, how to do propaganda to your classmates to convince them that injustice is going on. And of course, it's all usual: caste and gender. Everything comes back to Hinduism. So for 20 years, the mainstream has been carrying what I think some of the Hindutva warriors online think is a fringe left belief. No. What you think is a fringe left belief is the mainstream. It is the mainstream in America. It is the mainstream in India, in your children's schools, in colleges, in your workplace. So I think what has happened by this failure to understand the landscape is that people are swinging from extreme bravado to extreme cowardice. Okay? So a very normal thing somebody could say to their colleagues, say about Hinduphobia, they get scared to do it. And then they get pent up, and then online they will go all brash. So I think that is the main crisis with social media, to summarize, as far as Hindus are concerned. There is siloization and inability to reach not only technologically but also verbally, communicatively, persuasively to the other side. Second, there is a crisis of authority because no one knows who to follow.
Right.
Third, there is also this lack of Bharatiya or Indic or Sanatani or Dharmic values in communication. Like, what does it mean to be a sattvic social media communicator when everything is so tamasic and rajasic, right? So, when people are chasing ratings and gotchas and, stuff like that, it cheapens the discourse.
Right.
So I think those are some of the problems with social media today.
But when it comes to the shift of opinion, or as they call the shift of the Overton window, I was speaking with Dr. Elst a couple of months ago, and we were talking about the Ram Temple movement. And I noticed on TV that, all channels everywhere, they were talking about it and they were celebrating as if they had themselves done some kar seva.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
But just go back 5 years and the same anchors, the same channels, they were vehemently against the Ram Temple.
True.
So what explains that shift then?
Well, the critics would still say then they exist and they haven't changed their views. I think numerically they're a minority, but mentally they have stayed. There's silos, which is still the mainstream in a way. They would say it's out of fear of government they're doing it, right?
Or maybe if it's not fear, then I think it's legitimate to say that because it's a political victory as well, so you tend to kind of, align with the powers that be.
Or if I may add to that, it could also be a commercial proposition.
Of course, yeah.
That, let's face it, that is the biggest thing that's happening, and no one wants to miss out on it. I mean, anybody who was not, if you were not showing that day, who was going to watch your channel?
Right.
I mean, if you're lucky, you would have an anchor or a guest that, you liked. But yeah, no, I mean, it is tempting to go beyond the skepticism. I think, yes, that moment was something special because, yes, it was on every channel and it was on the streets. I think ultimately...
No, but you could say that it was always on the streets.
Well said, well said. Yeah.
But it is just that, what I found surprising was that these, the elite, these anchors and opinion makers, for once, they were speaking as if they were practicing Hindus.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Then, we'll have to see if it lasts through the election season.
I'm sure it won't. The skeptic in me did not, I did not take it at face value even back then. I knew that there's something wrong there. So, yeah. Okay. So, we are coming towards the end of this conversation, and I must include, a brief detour towards our mutual interest, which is ecology and temples, right? And how they are central to the Hindu consciousness, yet we find them absent from the Hindu discourse. Not so much temples, because temples are also places of commerce now, and there's a lot of footfall in temples. But ecology and environmental concerns are typically seen as Western or leftist problems, or that's something that these protesters and radicals do. But we also did a Twitter space when we talked about these things. So, what do you think can be done to bring these issues, temple and ecology, and when I say temple, I don't mean increasing footfalls, but in recognizing the value of the temple as the tradition imagines it to be, right? Not as just places where you widen roads and make more people visit, but also as devalayas, as they are properly called, and to respect the maryada, the protocol of visiting a temple and conducting yourself in the appropriate manner. So these are things that are not, they're not part of the what you would call as Hindu discourse. So how do you think that can be done?
First thing is, be afraid for your future in this life and beyond. If you're a Hindu, I'm assuming that resonated with you. I'm trying to scare you, and I'll tell you why maybe you should be scared. Second, be scared for the well-being of your children, because according to demographics, I think if you're Indian, you do have children, and you've not reached the point of Gen Z and millennials in America, where I think a lot of people are deciding not to have children anymore, or get married or have even relationships. So at the moment, I'm shifting our attention away from what we think of as the past, as mandirs and temples and civilization and all that, to the future. Now, I think the current discourse about Hinduism is dominated by what I would call a horizontal, spatial, congregationist, modern mass society thinking. And that is unavoidable to some extent, because we are living in modernity. We are living in a mass society. We are governed by systems of mass governance, and our thinking is also mass thinking to a large extent. So we assume that we had a political problem in the past with temple destruction. Now we have a friendly government or a party backing up our desires. So, temples will be built and, touristified, and a lot of people can, take a holiday and have darshan and, local, snacks and, all that stuff. But, this is, as Sabarimala showed us, and Sabarimala was, I think, an incredible awakening, frankly, more than Ram Mandir in some ways, in terms of what we learned from it. And of course, full admiration, to Sai Deepak and to you and everybody in the temple movement in Bharat. People realized that there is a difference between, the modern historical, Rama and Krishna were national heroes approach to things, and what your mother and grandmother taught you. That is, you go to a mandir, that's where God is. That is where the Bhagavan is. So you take off your shoes, you have to take a bath. This is what you do, you don't do in each temple. So that fundamental reality, which, again, the Bal Gangadhar theory of learning, nobody really gave us a theory about why it was there, but we each imitated our elders. That kept coming generation to generation. That's what I call the vertical. So we have the vertical understanding and practice of Devalayas and what they mean to us. And now we have this horizontal society and horizontal mindset where we think in which we just think all the temples should, one temple is the same as another, God is everywhere, or a temple should be like a museum or a amusement park. All that crazy stuff is going on. Because if you contradicted it, they'll assume that you're part of this conservative, orthodox, Brahminical, traditional Hinduism, which is bad. We are for the modern reform Hinduism.pdf, all that stuff. But sorry, let me finish my scare tactic first. So for a second, don't think about the temple. Think about the scariest, darkest, gloomiest, apocalyptic movie you have seen. They've made one in India. I had a tough time watching it. KGF.
Okay.
I mean, all dust and grime and exploitation and, all that stuff. I was in Bellary recently. Sadly, that's how it is. I mean, the pollution there. I mean, all the factory smoke and everything. So think about 20, 30 years from now. You don't even have to go further than that, when the same children you're slogging to put through school and college today are about your age, and perhaps they will have children. What are their children, your grandchildren, going to have to deal with in terms of the poison in the air? Every day, buildings, roads being dug up, buildings being destroyed. What is the insanity, the monstrous ecological destruction going on? And we're all suffering from, all of this. And we say, oh, but it's okay, it's growth, it's GDP, it has to happen. But why can't it happen with a little more kindness and consideration for other people, with a little more creativity, jugad, as they say? There is no dharmic jugad. All jugad now is adharmic. So picture Bharat in about 20, 30 years from now, with even more pollution and destruction and urban blight everywhere and dug up roads and health problems. But good side, being sarcastic here, temples are still there. There'll be one big box concrete building, and people, thousands of people are going there. So government is excited, everybody is excited that footfalls are happening. There is one big box concrete structure, and people with a lot of shops and parking garage, everything. And you go in there, you don't recognize anything there. Finally, somewhere in the end, you realize, especially if you paid some money and you get to go closer, oh my God, there is one, deity, Vigraham there. Oh, there is Ayyappa Swami, or there is Lakshmi Devi or Krishna. So, are you going to be, what is the experience of seeing that Bhagwan there going to be for your grandchild? Maybe, we are resilient, that's the power of the Devatas. They will still get energized and all that. But imagine how difficult it is going to be for them to then try and pass that experience on to the next generation, because the propaganda is also hurting. So, long story short, I just want to convey what it was like going to a mandir 20, 30 years ago. If you went to Tirupati or or you went to Vaishno Devi 20, 30 years ago, right? Now, you could say the population was less and that's why it was all pleasant. But the challenge now is, if you don't feel like you're going to a Punya Kshetra, if it looks like you're just going to another town with urban blight, what is the experience you have to learn in the course of this life? Because in the course of this life, our goal is to, one, get the best bhavas and experiences possible, so we get some mokshik or what is that called, escape velocity. And also pass it on, because we believe very much that we need to pass on that much of responsibility to our children, not just to study and become rich, but to also do our traditions for 3 generations, right? Which I did for my mom earlier this year. So if you look at it that way, from a vertical futures point of view, I think the 2 things we have to think about. One is the broader destruction of ecology happening in India because of this growth madness and all that. And the second is the need to take back temples as being above anything to do with growth, GDP, modernity, capitalism, even democracy. I wrote one article in the print after my tour in Andhra in January, and where I noticed, some of the things that were happening, like on the day of the Ram Janmabhoomi, Ram Mandir Pratishta, Pran Pratishta. Every temple in Andhra is surrounded, first of all, by giant statues of political leaders, and by SR NTR most popular in that part. And also every village in Andhra has a lot of very colorful buildings called churches. So, they're paying attention to aesthetics, right? Even if it's a small cement building, it's painted in pink and blue and it looks very ornate and all that. So without the aesthetic experience, and that you still get in Hampi to an extent. I think I'm scared really that it may change in Hampi already, because the more people go there, the more governments want to now touristify, put a tram and tourist and all that stuff. So I think the way forward for India, all of us, citizens, governments, leaders, politicians, journalists, cultural creative people, artists especially, right, dancers, singers, please try and popularize this idea of plan A temple, plan B temple. So what I mean by plan A temple is preservation. Plan A means the original Punya Kshetras, excuse me, which are located in the womb of Mother Nature, in the womb of Bhudevi, where preservation of the ecology is very important, preservation of the traditions is very important. So please don't bring this expectation, this populist expectation that it's democratic for every temple to be, just thrown open to everybody as if it's a public park. Okay, I mean the government may run temples, but that doesn't mean it's a public property. And most educated Hindus today know that the government does not run temples as a favor to Hindus. It's a profit-making venture for them. Absolutely. And it's reaching dangerous proportions in some states, Andhra, for example. And I'm mentioning that because I know a lot of my more cosmopolitan, liberal, Hindu in well, they assume they're Hindu, but they don't really understand what's happening to Hindu issues around them. They assume that the government subsidizes Hindu temples and it's not fair in a secular democracy that the government is pandering to Hindus by controlling temples. So, disabuse yourself of that notion and please popularize the idea that there is a space for democratic aspirations to be fulfilled in temples, and that is not only democratic but capitalistic, populistic, carnivalist, whatever you want to call it. So there you can have the mega temples like Abu Dhabi or outside Hyderabad. Anybody wants to build, has the money and wants to build a giant temple, giant statue, by all means go ahead and do it. But wherever there is an ancient temple or a Punya Kshetra surrounded by a forest or a mountain, the wider the geographical space that you manage to preserve, the greater the punya. Okay, so if you're in a position of power, don't think you're going to get punya by sending lakhs more people to a tiny temple up in Ahobilam in the forest or something. I know it feels that way. Maybe something should be left alone. And it's very important because the two things I think that are going to be in real short supply, and in a sense this will probably segue us into 1984. The environmental resources are going to be in short supply. Your children won't be able to see what a mandir gopuram looks like. That's what I was struggling to say. In our recent tour in Andhra in January, this is what happened. Mm-hmm. Every other temple is thrilling because it's remote and it's preserved. As you go there, you can see the gopuram and the architecture, everything. There's a pond, it's very serene. There was one in Andhra which was so serene, I don't even want to say the name now. Now, 10 minutes away from it, there's another temple which I'm sure was very serene when my parents used to go there. Now, you can't see the structure because it's completely surrounded by huge buildings. And until you go inside, you go through this concrete maze of lines and policemen and government endowment officers, whatever. Until you actually go near the Garbhagruha and see the deity, you don't feel like you're in a mandir. So that is one of the scary things that might happen in 20, 30 years. So in contrast that, today you go to Hampi, you go into the valley, you see the boulders and mountains, the river, and that small Yantrodharka temple there. That also they've messed with a little bit because they wanted to build a staircase and add a door because it was getting crowded, I understand. But unfortunately, what they did was they put like this very garish, colorful marble, kitchen counter marble wall. So up and down for miles, you see this one color, just the rocks and grey and blue river and everything. And just this very funny speck of kitchen table stone, just sticking out. So in little ways, we have stopped understanding aesthetics. And aesthetics is a very important part of, I think, the mandir experience. And of course, ultimately, it's also about the sampradayas there, because you go there, things happen to you.
True.
And now I'll get to the segue to memory and induced forgetting and propaganda. The last time I went to Tirumala was in 2004, I think. And it was very, difficult. By then it was very crowded as opposed to my childhood. When I was a kid growing up in Madras, my mother used to take me to Tirumala once a month. That was the thing.
Wow.
Everyone in my family used to go up the hill once a month. My father told me he climbed the hill 7 times in his life. Yeah. With his best friend, Khan Mama. So, there, we've always been inclusive that way. He was a professor and a dear friend of his. So, so he was of a generation where literally they would just walk out of their house and just walk up the hill and come. And that's how it was. 2004, obviously, already the big queues, everything was there. But anyway, but the profound thought I had while standing before the deity was, now remember, 2004, I was still very much a kind of very liberal Gandhi kind of Hindu. Not that, maybe I'd exerted too much rational skepticism. I believed that is God, that is Bhagwan, that is Venkateswar Swami. But I used to call myself agnostic about things like reincarnation and fundamental doctrines, in the Dharma at that period. So, but then when I was standing there, I suddenly said, man, what if I had a previous Janma? And in that Janma, I'm pretty sure I must have come to the same temple. And I kind of spooked myself out by thinking that. See, I think that's why I write novels, because I keep having imaginative excursions like this. And then again, my rational mind kicked in. And then I thought, okay, even if there is no such thing as reincarnation, I am pretty sure that generations of my ancestors stood here before this guy here. Big guy, great guy. So, it was a powerful feeling. So what I'm trying to say is, again, it's the vertical awareness, vertical consciousness. So I think in 2-3 generations, it's very important to do what we can to restore and preserve whatever is left of nature in Bharat, trees, forests, mountain, air, water, and the landscapes around mandirs. Everything else everything is being sold and destroyed for development. At least the ecology around the temple should aesthetically remain, so children can see and experience the whole thing and say, hey, this is what my ancestors saw. And this tree was there when my father was a kid and climbed that tree maybe. So that kind of pedagogical possibility should be preserved. And why it should be done? Because I think the second biggest danger we're in is the destruction of memory. And I'll pause there.
So that, like you already said, that brings us to the question on what you're teaching in your class on Orwell online, I suppose.
Yeah, right? Yeah, this is a small class.
So the assault on memory and how that relates to propaganda.
Yeah.
If you could just flesh that out for us.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been teaching the small online class put together by my friend Rekha Garu, who runs Hindu Parenting. She's done some wonderful podcasts, and she's taught a few classes for children on Alankara Shastra. And that's sort of how I became familiar with her work. And she's a wonderful teacher, and she is doing what, if we really had decolonization of education, would be happening, where because she was explaining these concepts of dhvani and rasa and auchitya to children, modern English medium kids, some kids from America, and teaching them how to apply it to what's going on in the world around them. So they were really enjoying it because she's a brilliant teacher. And then we talked and we came up with this idea that I would love to teach a class on a great novel. Because I think one of the ways we thought this had to be done was, again, it goes back to our earlier conversation about students. See, what's happening, I think, for a lot of Indian students who go to America is we are lacking cultural literacy, not only civilizational literacy about our own customs, traditions, etc., but basic cultural literacy about what the other guy you're working with or sitting in class with or your professor cutting a joke or making a reference is talking about. We don't have it because I think for us, even though we are exposed to some pop culture on social media, etc., we have not had the broad liberal arts education almost every American gets, particularly the first 2 years of college, when they have to take like English, history, philosophy, arts, spread of classes. So when we go there, we are ill-equipped to understand, that society, its cultural forms, its thought, etc. So Rekha Garu and I thought we should do a class for Indian children on a novel, something very, very popular in the West, which used to be taught a lot in American schools. Now they don't teach it that much. And it's a novel I love because I'm, researching propaganda. And that is George Orwell's 1984. So we entitled the class Reading the Modern World Through 1984. So where the goal was to teach children, how to appreciate a novel, how the creativity, the novel writing process, but also see what's going on in the world today in terms of propaganda and dictatorship of the mind through Orwell's novel. And we thought we'd get, maybe 6 or 7 students. We ended up with I think almost 30.
Oh, wow.
Whole spectrum of age groups. And, she very rightly said, people are yearning in India for these kind of conversations because it's just not happening in schools, because in schools it's just STEM or whatever they program. But to get to the core issue of and it's been exciting for me to rediscover the study of phenomena, not in American academia, but with Indian children and their parents together. Orwell was a genius. I think there's nobody who understood propaganda as deeply and clearly as he did. There is a whole literature on propaganda studies now. It could be in popular culture, it could be in social philosophy, like Jacques Ellul, politics, etc. But I think Orwell was obsessed about it. So he took it very deeply. And many of the things he described in that novel, we could see in our class, are happening today. Textbooks being written, rewritten, news being changed, people being unpersoned or disappeared or cancelled. So I think memory is really what the battle is all about. And I wrote an article recently, it was published in the American Mind, called The Clash of Civilizations and Generational Change. And it was a look at Huntington's famous 90s article, which a lot of people don't like, because he said, look, Islam and the West and China are going to fight. And I mean, what he said is, what we see. India will be neutral. It will have a frenemy relationship sort of with America. China and the Islamic world, or at least China, Pakistan will be, besties. All these things, whatever. It turned out largely like he said, but what he alluded to, didn't get into much, is generational collapse. And that is what is happening in America today. Because after the October 7th attacks on Israel, they did a poll, Harvard Caps Harris. 49% of millennials, that is people born in, I guess, 80s and 90s, 51% of Gen Z, people born 95 to 2010, said the attacks are justified.
Wow.
Next question said, are you aware of the atrocities, what these guys did, the Hamas did? They said, yes. You consider it genocide? Yes. But is it justified? Yes. So you're looking at a moral line being crossed. Huntington didn't predict that. Because Huntington, in his book, keeps saying that there is a core, universal, basic moralism all civilizations share, that killing is wrong, right? Or some basic common morality is there. That has been crossed in the American youth. And how did it happen? Well, in a way, it is an erasure of memory. They have no past. And in 1984, in the novel, you keep seeing the destruction of the past. again and again and again, and I think that is India's greatest asset. We say the youth are our asset, or our IT skills and all that. The fact that every single Indian alive today has at least some memory of things being done 3 generations ago. And keeping that alive, because there's that famous saying I read in Abdul Kalam and the Swaminarayan Pramukh Swamiji book, that every civilization is only one generation away from extinction.
Correct.
I think it is so true for every Hindu alive today, because I think the Hindus who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, your relationship to every Hindu who's a child or a teenager or 20s, I mean, the world is hanging on that one thread. Okay, I'm not exaggerating, not just India. Because let's face it, in another 20, 30 years, every third, fourth person will be an Indian in the world. And you're going to have a world in which there's going to be a billion and a half people who are Chinese, whose memory has been tampered with, who are very fierce and nationalistic, but they are not really thinking about the future that much. They're not having children. The West is in complete free fall. It hates itself. The young. Another survey said something like 75% of youth in America say the American government should be revolutionarily overthrown.
Wow.
25%, not 20, I think even more, about a third of them say the founding fathers of America are villains. So there is this major, attack on memory and the past going on around us, and it's exactly like what Orwell wrote about in the novel. So I think, the great sort of cultural showdown, I don't want to be pessimistic and say there'll be a war, in the next 20, 30 years in terms of the global scenario, will be a battle of what I call memory blocks in that article. There is one memory block, which is, I think, China, Islam, and a part of America, the liberal West, that is premised on the idea of the past is something that should be overthrown. Okay. And there you can see between these three coalitions, you see where the advantage is, because demographically, Islam is much bigger than the West. Ideologically, it's much clearer. Now, China, we don't know at the moment. It has a lot of power, but we don't know persuasively where it's going to go, especially because many Chinese youth don't want to have kids. And the other side, you have what I call the Hindu Judeo-Western, which is more of a proposal, I think, than a reality, where you have Hindus who have the longest memory span here and some interest in defending it. Then you have the Jewish community, which is already very badly split. So some of them, I think, are seeing the need to defend it, like some of my very liberal Jewish friends who've been mugged very hard by reality, sadly. And then I think there is a slight bit of a conservative Christian, stirring, let's say, in America, which I only see mainly because Vivek Ramaswamy is doing so well. And, he's openly telling them, look, I'm a Hindu, I'm a vegetarian, and vote for me. And he's got the Christians actually, lining up to listen to him. And I think he's very well informed on the Western society. So that's again a great, inspiration, I think, for whether you agree with what he says or not, different. But if you're a young Indian, you're going to America, remember the most successful and possibly, soon to be very important Indian in America, Vivek Ramaswamy, is a guy who didn't neglect studying the past.
Right.
He hasn't disrespected his own past. He proudly says he's from a simple Tamil Brahmin family. And he talks about the Brahmin culture in Tamil Nadu where he grew up or where he visits. And, he's teaching Americans to respect their own past and their own ancestry, So that is a success story. So it seems to me that, that it won't be a clash of civilizations, but it will be a battle between those who want memories to be preserved and those who want to destroy it. And if the memory destroyers win, then it will really be like KGF and Blade Runner and every, or 1984, right? So I think that's the battleground.
Yeah. So this class, are you going to continue after this first batch is done?
Yes. I think maybe every 2-3 months, we will try and offer it again and again. Because the most amazing thing that happened, we discovered, is this is the first time many children and parents found themselves in a class together.
All right.
I mean, sometimes they said they'd taken a few shloka classes and things like that, but this is like a liberal arts class.
Right.
And I know many of our Hindu online fellows hate the word liberal arts, but hey, Hindus can do liberal arts, and this is the way it gets done, you know. So, you know, in one class, the children started talking about these mental health problems in the schools, and I mean, it was so moving. You know, some of the parents told me, I never knew what my child goes through in school.
Wow.
I just thought, you know, I'm working hard, paying the school fees, everything is going well. So I think when two generations can reconnect, it will be like that, you know, Michelangelo, God and man, finger pointing, you know. This will be the Dharma restored version of that.
Absolutely. So on that note, if you could, we'll end this conversation with what you're working on and what the future projects look like. Any books you're writing, or
So I've had a lot of books cooking.
Oh, and I must add that one of the my personal grouses with you is that you don't write enough.
So thank you. That's very kind of. That's. I almost reached a point where I thought I would hear people saying, "Stop writing." I had a tough time because I wrote two books which I really loved writing in around 2013-14. Saraswati's Intelligence, Part 1 of the Hanuman Kishkinda trilogy, and Rearming Hinduism. And for 10 years, I have been having a tough time getting a proper new book out. I did manage to write Part 2 of Kishkinda Chronicles, The Firekeepers of Jwalapuram. But somehow Part 3, the grand finale of Hanuman, has been eluding me. Partly, I think I'll tell you, you asked about social media's impact. It did impact me badly. Because from 2004 to 2004, I was 14. I wrote a book every 2 years and I was very happy doing it. 2014, I got on Twitter and Facebook. And oh my God, I don't know what use all my tweets and Facebook posts were. Maybe on and off they were. But yes, it has been hard to focus on writing books. So I have about 3-4 books partly written at the moment and approaching completion. One of them is about propaganda. Like a history of propaganda. The other one is more about generational change. And the other one is kind of a small book I want to write, like advice for Indian students going abroad. So those are the three things. I hope by the time Rearming Hinduism is relaunched this summer, at least one of them will also be ready.
Right.
That's my hope.
Right. So with that, I think I'll just we'll wrap this episode up, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time in having this conversation. And some of the things that we talked about will also come out as separate videos on Upword. And it's, as always, it was a pleasure and a privilege to speak with you. And we hope to have you back soon.
Thank you. So more books and more conversations with Upword.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.